WTO deal is a good deal for the UK.
Let's have a simple free trade deal, or we are leaving on WTO terms. And do you know what? They'll bite our arms off.
Let's save £40 billion. Let's go WTO.
The WTO deal saves £39 billion to invest in our public services.
Let's go global. Let's go WTO.
A WTO deal means we're free to maximise the benefits of Brexit.
Let's go bigger than Europe. Let's go WTO.
The WTO deal means we're free to control our laws, trade and borders.
We want to go global. We want World Trade Organization rules. We want freedom. We want to make our own rules. We want to be in charge. We want our parliament to be sovereign. WTO lets us do that.
No deal actually means a WTO deal, which is a good deal for the UK. We can save £39 billion and be free to maximise the many benefits of Brexit. Let's have a WTO deal.
Mrs May's considerate Brexit offers have now been rejected by the boys in Brussels 5 times in the past 2 years. Mrs May offered warm words of friendship. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered our cooperation on security. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered an extension of common rules. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered our flexibility on labour mobility. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May even offered them more of our money. And this time, the boys in Brussels said they wanted more. The UK has consistently offered the boys in Brussels absolutely huge concessions, yet it is never enough for these unaccountable bureaucrats who, let's remember, spend an awful lot of their time drunk. Come on, Mrs May, it's time to stand up to the bullies and say no more. Let's stop playing their silly games and trade under WTO rules. Doing so will save the country £39 billion, and we won't have to adhere to any of the EU's unreasonable demands. Instead, from March 29th, 2019, we will be an independent, sovereign and global trading nation. Sounds pretty good to us. Want to know more? Stay tuned to Leave Means Leave for more videos about the real benefits of a world trade deal. Hello, Britain. As the planet's fifth largest economy, Europe's foremost military power, and one of the Commonwealth's leading lights, we're all set for a truly global future. Our membership of countless alphabeti spaghetti international organisations puts us in a unique position and gives us a powerful voice in world politics. We are number one when it comes to soft power. Our institutions, our language, our values, our culture, and our history are revered across the globe. Our education system incubates a skilled workforce that foreign companies just can't get enough of, whilst our swanky legal system is so good for business that 80 other countries around the world decided they'd also use it. Our entrepreneurs like Bamford and Dyson are world leaders, and we are at the front of the pack in industries that are set to define the 21st century. So, Brussels, who's the daddy now?
The WTO deal is a good deal for the UK.
Let's have a simple free trade deal, or we are leaving on WTO terms. And do you know what? They'll bite our arms off.
Let's save £40 billion. Let's go WTO.
The WTO deal saves £39 billion to invest in our public services.
Let's go global. Let's go WTO.
The WTO deal means we're free to maximise the benefits of Brexit.
Let's go bigger than Europe. Let's go WTO.
The WTO deal means we're free to control our laws, trade and borders.
We want to go global. We want World Trade Organization rules. We want freedom. We want to make our own rules. We want to be in charge. We want our parliament to be sovereign. WTO lets us do that.
No deal actually means a WTO deal, which is a good deal for the UK. We could save £39 billion and be free to maximise the many benefits of Brexit. Let's have a WTO deal.
May used to say, nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But what she's agreed so far makes this the worst deal in history. She's agreed to hand over £39 billion to the EU, equivalent to buying the entire US population a round of drinks. For what? The worst deal in history. She's agreed to extend the transition period, risking a rerun of the whole thing so close to another general election. For what? The worst deal in history. She's handcuffed us to the customs union, so we can't strike free trade deals with anybody outside of the EU. For what? The worst deal in history. She's given away security cooperation, one of our most valuable assets. For what? The worst deal in history. She's giving away our competitive edge, tying us to suffocating EU rules indefinitely. For what? The worst deal in history. She's agreed to a backstop on the border, preventing us from leaving the EU ever. For what? We've given away everything without getting anything concrete in return. What do we have left to give, and what do we have to show for it? The worst deal in history. Mrs May's considerate Brexit offers have now been rejected by the boys in Brussels 5 times in the past 2 years. Mrs May offered warm words of friendship. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered our cooperation on security. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered an extension of common rules. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May offered our flexibility on labour mobility. The boys in Brussels said no. Mrs May even offered them more of our money. And this time, the boys in Brussels said they wanted more. The UK has consistently offered the boys in Brussels absolutely huge concessions, yet it is never enough for these unaccountable bureaucrats who, let's remember, spend an awful lot of their time drunk. Come on, Mrs. May. It's time to stand up to the bullies and say no more. Let's stop playing their silly games and trade under WTO rules. Doing so will save the country £39 billion, and we won't have to adhere to any of the EU's unreasonable demands. Instead, from March 29th, 2019, we will be an independent, sovereign and global trading nation. Sounds pretty good to us. Want to know more? Stay tuned to Leave Means Leave for more videos about the real benefits of a world trade deal. Hello, Britain. As the planet's 5th largest economy, Europe's foremost military power, and one of the Commonwealth's leading lights, we're all set for a truly global future. Our membership of countless alphabetti spaghetti international organisations puts us in a unique position and gives us a powerful voice in world politics. We are number one when it comes to soft power. Our institutions, our language, our values, our culture and our history are revered across the globe. Our education system incubates a skilled workforce that foreign companies just can't get enough of, whilst our swanky legal system is so good for business that 80 other countries around the world decided they'd also use it. Our entrepreneurs like Bamford and Dyson are world leaders, and we are at the front of the pack in industries that are set to define the 21st century. So, Brussels, who's the daddy now?
You will decide, and whatever your decision, I will do my best to deliver it.
There is a very clear choice between fear and the back of the queue. 500,000 jobs will be lost.
A one and only chance. The energy is on the weak side of the arm. Surrendered to anybody, and it won't start now.
Stop the Project Fear. Stop selling the electors short.
We were told that Brexit means Brexit.
This parliament is full of Remain MPs.
They can see going on in this place is a stitch-up.
At what point it was decided that Brexit means Remain?
This is the start of almost like a guerrilla campaign, if you like, of Parliament using every available opportunity to say not be prepared to accept no deal.
Have a final say by way of the people's vote. It's terribly convenient for buyers.
Set yourself free!
Instruction of the people wasn't leave subject to a deal, it was leave. Leave. Leave means leave. This is the worst deal ever in history, to pay £39 billion for nothing guaranteed in return.
What's your exit deal with the EU?
I wouldn't pay the EU anything. We would be trapped there like being in a straitjacket, and we've given the key of the padlock to the European Union. Garbage in equals garbage out with these economic models. Hate, fraud, waste and corruption. And in my view, the EU is riddled with all three of those things. Full steam ahead, properly, totally, to go to a world trade deal.
Please welcome to the stage, Richard Tice.
What a noise! What a noise. It's fantastic. Welcome, Brexiteers, to Westminster. We all know what happens in Westminster, and we need to tell them a very clear message from tonight's rally. The Leave means leave. Let's go, WTO rally. They need to hear us loud and clear throughout this evening. We've got a very simple message. Let's go, WTO. Let's practice it. Let's go, WTO. Let's go, WTO. One more. Let's go, WTO. They need to hear that. They need to understand it, because we have that confidence. It's hard to believe. When I founded this campaign straight after the referendum, I thought it might be needed for 6 months or so. Here we are, nearly 3 years later. Unbelievable. Facing the battle of our lives, a battle for Britain. We've had campaign rallies up and down the country over recent months, imploring people to write to their MPs, to persuade them to vote down the worst deal in history. The good news is that in that sense, the MPs have listened, and in record numbers, they have defeated the worst deal in history. That's the good news. What the MPs should now be saying, of course, is what the Prime Minister originally said, which we all know, many business people here tonight, we all know that no deal is always better than a bad deal. So the MPs should be saying, we've turned down a bad deal. They should be saying, we've turned down the bad deal, now let's go. And we'll get organised and we'll be ready, 24/7, 7 days a week. Sadly, the MPs, the majority of MPs, they don't share our belief in Britain. They don't share our confidence in Britain, our can-do attitude, our ability to make things happen and to get things done. No, they're weak, they're timid, they're scared. So what are they now saying? Any deal is better than no deal. I mean, you couldn't make it up. You really couldn't make it up. It's the worst negotiating tactic ever in history. And yet that is what our representatives are now suggesting. So guess what? If you're the European Union, marvellous. Is that another 10 billion? Is it another 30 billion? Is it another 50 billion? They're not going to stick at 39 billion when we don't actually need to pay them a single penny. We all know that WTO stands for the World Trade Organization, but it also stands for something else. Welcome to opportunity. The opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity to save 39 billion quid. The opportunity to be free as a sovereign, proud nation, to control our laws, our trade, do trade deals, and to control our borders. That's the opportunity that they should be embracing, like we're embracing. We've got some fantastic speakers tonight, all of them, either from politics or from the world of business, some great entrepreneurs. They are bold, they are courageous, and that's what we expect in our leaders. And our first speaker is a complete heroine of mine. She is fantastically principled, a woman of huge integrity, no nonsense. She is a proper no-nonsense person. She just tells it as it is. And because she comes from Northern Ireland, she understands the truth about the Irish border issue. And she will enlighten us again this evening. Before we welcome Kate to the stage, let's just see her in action on the video.
I'm one of the very few Labour MPs who genuinely want to leave the EU.
We're not prepared to put up with a deal which is keeping us half in, half out.
I believed her when she said Brexit meant Brexit, but I was wrong. I believed her when she set out her red lines in her Lancaster speech, but I was wrong. And I believed her when she said no deal was better than a bad deal. but I was wrong. We are a strong country, we are a proud country, we're a determined country with a people who believe and have confidence in our country. So let us go forward to March the 29th, leave the European Union and have that bright future which we know is ahead of us. Thank you so much for that welcome. It is absolutely wonderful to see so many of you here out on such a cold night, queuing for ages, but finally getting in. And I'm so pleased to be here to join you. You know, it's always good to appear on an all-party platform, people from different political parties, because to me, and I think to everyone in this room, and all of the 17.4 million people who voted to leave, our country comes before our party. It's particularly nice tonight to be joined by another woman on the panel. I'm looking forward to hearing from Esther very much later on. But I think we need to say tonight, very early on, that we are facing a battle ahead of us. We have faced, in the last number of months, a full frontal attack from so many in the media, from big business, from the lawyers in this country, from hardliners who have never, ever accepted the result of the referendum. And of course, as usual, from ex-prime ministers. Now, there's something about being an ex-prime minister that somehow gets you onto the Today programme probably once a week. And every time we have a rally, there seems to be Tony Blair. Every time we have a rally, Tony Blair is on the Today programme. And he was on the Today programme this morning again, as the lead supporter of a second referendum. And you know something I think about Tony Blair? If Tony Blair really wants to be taken seriously again for his views, other than on the Today programme, he could actually join the House of Lords. But of course, to join the House of Lords, he would have to declare all his financial interests. And he might, of course, try to get elected again, but I think I can move on to something more serious now. Just over the road, just a few hundred yards away, we have a parliament that is a Remain parliament, a parliament where the vast majority of MPs voted to remain. Now, not all of them are wanting to stop us leave. There are many genuine Remain MPs who have decided that they want to support the referendum result, support their manifesto, which is probably something new for some of them, and they have decided that they will support us leaving. But of course, the other in Parliament have spent their time since the 24th of June, since the day after the referendum 2016, plotting carefully, insidiously to try and get us to stay in. And they have been backed up by the lawyers in the House of Commons, the fully highly paid QCs in the House of Commons, and of course by a Speaker who says he's only doing his job. But in my view, and in many others, his job to him seems to be to thwart Brexit. And we saw that last week in a really amazing ruling that he gave where he overruled his own clerk, his own legal expert. And I think one of the most worrying aspects of what the Speaker did is that the idea of a disinterested Speaker, they used to wear the headgear, but he stopped doing that, but the idea was that the Speaker was above factions, a very precious part of our political inheritance, admired round the world. And what is so worrying that is gradually being whittled away by this Speaker. And it has been said, well, of course, this couldn't be happening. This country wouldn't allow that kind of thing. We're a fully fledged democracy. We're not a fragile democracy. But you know, it is happening right now. Look at what happened after the referendum. Those who'd led the losing side were showered with knighthoods, honours of all kinds. And the winning side, as Dan Hannan has I think very properly said today, were actually persecuted. Donors were suddenly told in late 2017 that their contributions counted as gifts, not political donations, as had always happened, and were therefore subject to inheritance tax. Because Leave had relied on predominantly individual donations, unlike the Remain campaign that was financed by Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and other big corporations. Oh yes. Shall we have another one for the CBI? And you know, maybe I'm as I get older, getting a little bit more cynical, but it is impossible to avoid the suspicion that from the day after the referendum, part of this kind of picking on Leave supporters was to ensure or to hope that next time there was a need, or when there was need for money for the EU sceptic campaigns, that would be much more difficult to get it funded. And I think that's very worrying too. But despite everything, and what is so optimistic tonight, despite everything, despite the attacks, despite the incredible abuse that we've all had, we are bigger than ever, we're stronger than ever right across the country, and we need to be strong for what is going to be happening in the next few months. Because let us be quite clear tonight, absolutely clear, the great betrayal has begun. In fact, it's begun a few months ago, but it is now really moving apace. Slowly, those who have never wanted us to honour the referendum are sensing and waiting for people to show that they have weakness, and there are a lot of people with weakness in our government. And some of those people, not necessarily in government, but some of those people outside who are pushing the second referendum and pushing the Remain side continually, are actually quite nasty people. And I make no apology today for criticising someone who sent a tweet which I thought was quite shocking. She writes for The Guardian. Her name is Polly Toynbee. And she tweeted today, what was, quotes, the will of people is now, quotes, the will of dead people. From Saturday, new young Remain voters on the register tip the balance versus the old dead Leavers. Time for a final say referendum. And if that's the kind of people that The Guardian wants to write for them, well, I'm glad I don't read The Guardian. And by the way, The Guardian got it wrong about last night. I actually don't drink champagne. Those of you who have read The Guardian will know what I'm talking about. And another one, just to say, tweets all the time. Another one here, pity we couldn't put the 52% to sleep permanently. One day, euthanasia will not only be legal but compulsory for the dregs of society. We'll call it moral cleansing. That was a tweet on December the 27th. Now, you heard the fuss that was made. You heard the fuss that was made a couple of weeks ago when Anna Soubry was heckled by a few people, not particularly nice people, I have to say, but nevertheless was heckled and was called a Nazi. In 5 minutes, I was able to turn up 20 tweets calling me a Nazi. You know, I think we have to accept that actually there's been a huge amount of nastiness on the Remain side. Now, you'll have heard people say that 52% of people voted to leave, 48% voted to remain. So really, as it was fairly close, but quite decisive in my view, then we should be actually giving something to the Remain side. You know, we should be saying that perhaps we should give a little bit more, we should compromise more, we should do all these things because they decided that it was a small majority. All I would say to you is, if it had been 52% Remain, 48% Leave, would we have people... Would we have had people beavering around in the House of Commons, the lawyers, all of the clever people in there who think they're so clever, trying to find, well, look, actually, it was a pretty small result. You know, could we find a little bit of Norway to put into our Remain? Or maybe we could only let the European Court of Justice sort of tell us a few things that we had to do. Of course it wouldn't have happened. And that is what is the hypocrisy of some of the people who are organising for that. We voted to take back control. We voted to take back control from Brussels, but to give that control, in my view, to the people, not to Parliament. People then elect Parliament. But the idea that somehow, in the end, we will allow Parliament, made up of Remain MPs who never wanted us to leave in the first place, to overrule that referendum will be one of the biggest attacks on democracy that there has ever been. Now, I'm conscious of the time, there's lots and lots of speakers. I just want to end by saying something about the backstop. I mean, the backstop is one of the most ridiculous suggestions and ideas that could possibly have been put in to try and solve a problem that wasn't there in the first place. It's not tenable, it's completely unnecessary, and it has been a result of a stitch-up between the European Union and the Irish government with an attempt to keep us as close as possible to the European Union when we leave. It is not going to be acceptable to the DUP. Unfortunately, Sammy Wilson couldn't be here tonight, otherwise you would be hearing lots of great jokes from Sammy. But the reality is that that backstop not only harms Northern Ireland economically in terms of the links with Great Britain, but is the first step on a move towards taking away Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, and I will never allow that to happen. Finally, because I see this clock's going against me. Now, if this was in the House of Commons, the Speaker would have already cut me off, so I better be careful. Just on the WTO and the theme of tonight, really, the scare stories that we've seen, the ridiculous scare stories, and you'll hear more about that from some eminent businessmen tonight who know what they're talking about. But the reality is, you know, that while we're here in the London sort of bubble and we're hearing it all the time in the media, again, out there, out in the real country outside London, people do not believe it. People just do not believe it. And I think that anyone giving up, to me, the idea that nobody talks to anybody until we've given up an option of a WTO is just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And I'm not criticising anybody in particular. But I would say that anyone who votes in the end to actually take that option off the table is playing into the hands of the European Union and is the first step in really betraying the referendum result. So I want to leave on an optimistic We are a very, very great country. I'm so proud of my country. We can make leaving the European Union a huge success, and we have to keep strong and determined and not let those people who want to wreck it win. We can win. We are determined. We will win.
Brilliant. Kate, come here. Some more. Isn't she great? If only the House of Commons was full of another 600 plus people like Kate, this country would be a much better place. Kate referred to the betrayal, and the tragedy is we can begin to smell it. We can feel it coming down the track. Whether it's next week or 2 or 3 weeks' time, we know it's coming. An extension to Article 50, they need more time. And then, of course, the dreaded second referendum. Whatever happens, ladies and gentlemen, we at Leave Means Leave, we will be ready. Rest assured, we are gearing up. We will need everybody's help, but we are raising money. We have got some great people offering to work for us. We've got 3,000 volunteers already delivering tens of thousands of leaflets up and down the country every week. And I want to pay a huge thank you to them. If you can join me in a hand of applause, because they are fantastic. We're working on plans. We've taken new offices. Not only will we be ready, ladies and gentlemen, but we will win. And we have a very simple message. Heaven forbid we need to. Let's tell them again. So our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is from the world of business. One of the greatest entrepreneurs in this country. He knows about risk. He knows about the challenges of employment, of revenues, of profits and losses. He runs an incredible family business, an international business, all over the world. So he knows a thing or two about global trade. Not only is he an incredibly successful entrepreneur, but he's an incredibly generous philanthropist, in particular to the world of education. And quite rightly, he was knighted for his services to tourism. Before we welcome Sir Rocco Forte to the stage, let's just hear him in action recently about Brexit.
You supported Brexit. What do you make of Mrs May's deal?
Well, it's sort of locking yourself in jail, giving the European Union the key, and then saying to them, you decide when we come out and on what terms. It's a complete disaster and completely unnecessary.
How confident are you that London continues as that flagship location?
London has everything. It has a combination of the business side and the culture, because I understand how difficult it is to do business in Europe. In relation to the rest of the world, Europe is not competitive.
Please welcome to the stage
Sir Rocco Forte.
Good evening. I wouldn't be here today making this speech, and neither would Tim, if we followed the example of businessmen and women who are reluctant to speak out in favour of Brexit. They would argue he and I ought not to speak our mind because it will alienate a proportion of our customers who might not agree with us. Certainly not you. But I believe that at a time when the country needs clear information from those who do run businesses, that people like us must speak out about the potential benefits and huge opportunities in this monumental change we're standing on the threshold of. Because while Corbyn calls this a crisis, I call it a turning point with benefits that are potentially so great it would be irresponsible not to point them out. We would seem to be moving to a no-deal Brexit, by which I mean WTO-based Brexit. With the defeat of Mrs May's proposed withdrawal agreement in Parliament, a deal that pleased nobody, there's an opportunity to move to something far, far better. There's been a long campaign to present a no-deal Brexit as a terrifying scenario where all hell will be let loose and our economy and job prospects will be devastated and where we will all be a lot much poorer. As that piece of paper carefully posed to stick out of the minister's folder said, "No food, no Channel Tunnel." This tells you everything you need to know about how far the government is prepared to go to scare people into giving up on what they voted for. How patronising to think that British people will believe a line like that. And now we hear the Chancellor, Philip Hallam, he seems to have his own private policy for Brexit. In the thrall to the vested interests of big business, privately told executives in a conference call yesterday that has been leaked that ministers are planning to stop a no-deal Brexit, even if it means rescinding the triggering of Article 50, reversing the Brexit process entirely. If this is true, the government is creating panic where there does not need to be panic and caving into the scare stories to potentially utterly betray the British people. I don't believe at all the scare stories to be true. And if you look at it in a rational way, they can't be. I believe a far bigger risk for our country is to stay in the EU. Remainers have never been able to sell the merits of the EU and the European project because it's unappealing to the British electorate who can smell a rat a mile off. So they have restricted themselves to talking about reforming it from within. This is a fancy story, as unrealistic as they claimed they were setting out to reform, as if one claimed one was setting out to reform the mafia from within. The reality is that three extremely Europhile prime ministers, Major, Blair, and Cameron, all passionate about the EU and well in with its leaders, never managed to wring a single concession out of it. So, with nothing to say of any real substance about their hopes for the future of the EU, the Remain camp have reverted to scaremongering about the damage that would be done if we left. This is the main thrust of the Remain campaign as the country moved towards a Leave vote, and this is what is happening today as the country moves towards a no-deal Brexit. They were completely wrong the first time round. They are completely wrong again today. From what is being suggested by them, you would surmise that the whole British economy is dependent on Europe. This isn't the case at all. Only 5% of GDP is represented by trade of goods crossing borders, and 12% of GDP if one allows for services in which there is no free market, of course. 94% of businesses, 94% of businesses which make up the bulk of the UK economy and employment are not involved in trading with Europe. So where is this Armageddon going to come from? All the cliff edge and the crashing out bears no resemblance to reality. Trade with Europe or travel into Europe is not just going to stop when we depart from the EU. A wall isn't going to go up between ourselves and other European countries. They will continue to export to us as we will continue to export to them, but under different rules. 55% of our trade is carried out with countries outside of the EU, including the US, which is the biggest single other country we trade with. We do this under WTO rules. There are no problems for our exporters. There are no queues of lorries at our ports of entry with goods coming in. There's little physical checking done at borders. Only 1% of incoming goods are checked. And much of the just-in-time manufacturing you hear so much about in the UK uses components coming from outside the EU with no problems at all. Many countries trade successfully with the EU on WTO terms. The US and China sell more into the EU than we do, and our trade with the rest of the world on WTO terms has grown faster than our trade with the EU, despite the free market, over the last 5 years. Tariffs, of course, will be levied on British goods exported to Europe, but these amount to about £5 to £6 billion, less than half of our current net contribution to the EU. Exporters have the benefit, of course, of the 15% devaluation of sterling since the Brexit vote, which will more than compensate for the tariff increases. Leaving to trade on WTO rules means we are immediately free of EU control. We get to keep our 39 billion, the cost of the withdrawal deal, which we can use to revitalise those parts of our economy which need it most. We can immediately set about negotiating free trade deals with other countries and reignite our trading ties with the Commonwealth. We will also be free to set our external tariffs in ways which benefit our own economy. We will be able to lower tariffs to the benefit of our consumers on imported goods that we do not produce ourselves. It is suggested our economy, the fifth largest in the world, is far too small to secure free trade deals on advantageous terms. And even if we do it, it will take a long time. What nonsense! Australia, a much smaller economy than ours, recently successfully negotiated deals with China, South Korea, and Japan inside 18 months. Iceland, a tiny economy, has a trade deal with China. It is the EU that takes forever to negotiate trade deals, as it has to take account the needs of 27 different countries, a very laborious process. This is not mentioned by the Remain camp, but part of a great pessimistic consensus of the great and the good. You might almost call it the pessimistic tendency. I've not known such a sense of defeatism and such a shameful lack of belief in the British people by the ruling class of this country since the 70s. It is almost treasonable how little belief the elite have in the innate brilliance, resilience and ability to thrive of the British people. And that's where Brexit as an opportunity comes in. In the 70s, Mrs. Thatcher dragged us out of our torpor and enabled us to see the light, to become competitive, a force for good in the world once again. Today, there's no Mrs. Thatcher to give us back our edge, but there is this turning point of our leaving the EU. We can unshackle ourselves from a system which is clearly not working. When we joined the common market, it represented 35% of world trade, of the world economy. Now the EU represents 15% and is shrinking. The world economy is expanding at a much faster rate than the EU and will continue to do so. Why? Why should we restrict ourselves to such a small share of the world's trade with all the bureaucracy, control and subservience it entails? When we can become members of NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. As a hotelier,
Sit down. Sit down. We respect democracy, don't we? We respect the right of free speech and we expect them to do the same. Carry on, Rocco.
As a hotelier who operates in the UK, Europe and other parts of the world, I can categorically say that it is much more difficult to do business in Europe than it is in the UK. The EU's high corporate taxes, complex labour and legal system make Britain's low taxes and fair laws very appealing. Let's face it, the European economy has not been a success. Since the financial crisis, it has grown much more slowly than our own, and a number of European countries have not yet returned to their pre-crisis GDP levels. It has very high levels of unemployment, with frightening levels of youth unemployment. We stand on the threshold of a unique opportunity to be free of all of that. Why on earth would you cling to all that failure when you can carve out your own success? If we let it, Brexit can be the catalyst to move this country forward again. Britain, as a powerhouse economy, a beacon of road tax and rural regulation in Europe, this is the exciting prospect that we stand on the threshold of. We mustn't let the doom-mongers talk us out of it. We must tell the good news about this historic moment of opportunity, allowing the British people to grasp it and make it their own.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Isn't it great? I talked earlier about boldness, about courage, and Sir Rocco has just demonstrated tremendous courage. And a small plug for him, if you ever get a chance and you just happen to be drifting past one of his hotels, do drop in. He also referred to the hideous levels of youth unemployment across the Eurozone. And isn't it fantastic? Totally contrary to the nonsense talked about by the Remoaners, that all young people are Remainers. Absolute nonsense. We've got a fantastic team here behind the stage. And they aspire, they know that in this great country of ours, they have fantastic opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, and they will look up to Sir Rocco and say, that could be me in just a few years' time. That's the joy of the United Kingdom. And we carry on with the theme of courage to our next speaker, who is a long-standing politician, but before that, he was a soldier. He served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. He became an MP in 1992 and has forever been a brave, long-standing Eurosceptic. He became leader of the Conservative Party. And then, when he finished that, he fought for one of his deepest passions, tackling poverty. And he set up a think tank, the Centre for Social Justice, that he still chairs and runs, and that does incredible work and research to help reduce poverty in this country. When Mr. Cameron was appointed Prime Minister, our next speaker was then appointed Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. And he carried out that role until he felt compelled, on a matter of principle, to resign because of what George Osborne was doing with austerity. That is a courageous politician who will resign from cabinet on principle, ladies and gentlemen. He's campaigned tirelessly for Brexit. He still is doing so. Before we welcome Ian Duncan Smith to the stage, let's just see him in action on the video.
I'm tired of being told that this was some sort of disaster or some accident. I genuinely and passionately believe when I campaign to leave that this country will do incredibly well, whatever the arrangements are.
We have to leave because the British people have said we should leave. The idea that we can suddenly give way on some of our core red line issues has to be told to the EU straight away. That's not going to happen.
They're taking the liquid from us rather quickly. I just wish many more in this House would stand up for those who voted to leave genuinely, not stupidly, not because they hated people, but because they wanted something to change. They wanted to take back control of their country, and that's what I want to do.
Please welcome to the stage
Ian Duncan Smith, MP.
Richard, Rocco, Kate, thank you very much, all of you here. I have some scribbled notes. I have no idea what they are. I wrote them at the back and I can't read them now, so forgive me if I think I've come to a Remain rally after... Frankly, that's what you would get if you held a Remain rally. He couldn't even remain. Anyway... Can I tell you, it's a real privilege to be here tonight. All of the list of speakers, absolutely my great friend Esther, who's fantastic, you're yet to hear from her, Tim and everybody else that I've mentioned. But the one person I want to talk about, just for about 20 seconds, is my hero, Kate. When people talk about courage, when people talk about standing firm, when people talk about defying those that you believe to be wrong and standing up for your principles, it is indeed for me an enormous privilege, Kate, to be in the same hall as you. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I must start by telling you something about why I really voted to leave, and then I'll get on to the serious stuff. I was asked a few years ago, on behalf of the Prime Minister, to attend a conference in Berlin. I know what you're thinking. DWP, work and pensions, you get everywhere. Now listen, I went to Berlin to stand in for the Prime Minister. Well, I had been leader of the party at some point. I know, I try and forget about it as well. But the main point is that I got in there and I learned something, because I never used to go to those halls at all, but I learned what committees and things like that are like in the EU. And I first of all started in the morning with all the people that were like me, and I sat at this huge horseshoe table and had earphones on and everything else. And I found that everybody else there, the level of the people like me, all had about 5 people behind them. Well, of course, I'd come over with nobody because of austerity, and I didn't want to pay for the air ticket for anybody else while I was at it. So the Foreign Office was so worried about how it looked, I ended up with a waiter being dragooned in to sit behind me. And, well, everybody passed notes up and down, and so did he, but his were menus. I like to think that in that couple of minutes I achieved more for Europe than anybody else, which is not deciding absolutely anything. Anyway, I then went to become the Prime Minister, you know, as I say, was leader once. Anyway, the point is that I sat, and there's these 3 horseshoe tables in Mrs. Merkel's great place, and an inner, and then there's an inner, and an outer. And I'm Prime Minister, well, that is to say, I am Prime Minister now, although I'm still Secretary of State. That is, all those Prime Minister and Secretary of State, but Secretary of State and Prime Minister, but not to be confused with the two. But anyway, I'm now sitting on the inner of the inner, and then there's an outer, and the inner where the heads of government are, you know, a select band, and there's a translating booth in the corner and headphones on. As I sit down, the President of Cyprus sits down next to me, and I tell you, this is a man worth voting for, because he went to sleep straight away. He didn't even bother to wake up. I mean, really, that's serious politics in my book. But anyway, Mrs. Merkel starts, and off she goes, said she'll speak briefly, and after about half an hour, she hands over to, that time, Monsieur Hollande. Do you remember him? He's quite short. Actually, do you know, suddenly, I think also, isn't Monsieur Macron quite short? Anyway, it's not got nothing against. It may be a lack of good British beef, but anyway, the point is, that, to finish us off, as we were going around, everybody said how wonderful things were everywhere in Europe, and I realised that this was what this was all about. And finally it came to me after about an hour, and Mrs. Merkel said to me, "Herr Iron." I know, I did feel a bit taller. "Herr Iron, would you like to speak?" And I said, "Indeed, Mrs. Merkel, thank you very much, a huge privilege, thank you so much indeed." And I thought to myself, what do? I'm British, and I'm abroad. You know, and I'm at work and pension. I don't get to go abroad a lot, but I'm abroad, and British people abroad, they always tell a self-deprecating joke, don't they? I don't think the Germans would, but I thought, well, I'll start with something. And I said, "Mrs. Merkel, a huge privilege, and I'm going to be brief, because just like the rest of you, I've sat here for an hour, and I've now lost the will to live." I wasn't greeted with that at all, actually, funnily enough. Stony silence, rather sad, actually, I thought. And anyway, I quickly told them how wonderful things were and realised I'll never come abroad again. The headmaster, when I get back, will cane me or something, and I'll be in trouble in detention like I always was at school. Anyway, I kind of sat back in the seat and listened to the gentle snoring of the man on my right, and this went on round. And after about another 40 minutes, it all ended, and we were going for the photograph. And as we're going out, I think it was the RST who said to me, I won't use his exact words because some of them are quite Anglo-Saxon. He said, you're a ... funny man. I said, why am I so funny? He said, oh, you don't know how funny you are. And I said, why is that? He said, because I speak enough French and I could hear the translation in the booth. And when you said you'd lost the will to live, they translated as you were terminally ill. So when people say, why did you vote to leave? The answer is very simple. I can't go back there because they think I'm dead. But the whole reality that we face right now, ever since before we started on the referendum, is this enormous establishment plot to tell us that we are a miserable little nation, we're incapable of doing anything, and that we must fear the future. That is what they tell us day in, day out. Apparently, when we leave the European Union, we will never be able to fly anywhere, ever again. We won't be able to go by sea because all the ferries will be stacked up, queued across the way. You could actually walk across them, apparently, according to this. So at least that's one bonus. If you get stuck halfway across, you won't survive because there are no medicines, and so it'll be back to home cures. Homeopathy will become the thing in the UK because we can't get anything to help us recover. I really hope some of those who spout this nonsense actually do find that problem exactly exists. But I must tell you, there will be no food either, which means that we won't even make it to the boats to walk across because we'll all be dead by that stage. And finally, we simply will give up because Britain has always been a poor, useless little island on the north of a great continent. What a lot of rubbish! I ask a simple question. What has happened to the British establishment that they no longer believe in their country, so that they fear more than they care about, and they lose it at the drop of a hat when it comes to what matters? My father would turn in his grave. His generation fought to save this country. A man that had 5 gallantry medals, that put his life on the line almost every day of the war, just like many of his friends. He said, I didn't fight against people, I fought for people. I fought for the great British people and the wonderful freedoms and things that they have given to the world, and I would do it again, he said. And the one thing that he taught me, most of all, is that why I'm in this business, why I'm in politics, is because I love this country. It's what gets me up in the morning. But you cannot love your country and then throw it away so that somebody else governs it. That has been our problem for 40 years. Successions of the establishment who have run this place have told us endlessly that this was only about a marketplace. Only in the UK do we have this ludicrous debate that this is all about markets, it's all about trading, and it's all about business. It is not. The people that designed this project, like a man you've never heard of called Altiero Spinelli, they believed that they must eradicate the nation state because they believed that competing nation states were always going to end at war. And I can understand why in the Depression and into the Second World War many of them felt like that. But I don't. I don't believe that at all. I believe competing nation states in democracies with strong democratic institutions are a force for good. Competition makes us better. Our experience in the run to the war was different from many of them. We had strong democratic institutions, the same in America and many around the world. So when people got angry about the problems they had, and quite rightly too, about their loss of jobs and their miserable conditions, they vented it against politicians, took them out and got new governments. They didn't tear the system down and ask unelected oligarchs to run them because they would somehow know better. They believed in the concept of freedom and democracy, and we survived as a result. And that is the point. The point is, this is a political project that we have never fully been told the truth about. And now we have chosen to leave it. In 2016, as I walked out of the offices into the early morning mist, seeing the sun rise over the east, I thought this was the greatest day of my life. But you know, I never thought I would have to fight quite so hard to do what the British people asked us to do. I come hot foot from a building across the way, which, strangely enough, doesn't represent the British people anymore. On this subject, the vast majority of those in the Parliament, in the House of Commons and also particularly in the House of Lords, are genuinely Remainers. They do not believe that the British people really could have got it right in 2016. And they've used every mechanism, every delay, every possibility to try and thwart what the British people voted for in 2016. It is a fight. It is a daily fight. It is a fight to remind them that the people that they thwart are the very people that put us in that place. It is a privilege. It is a privilege to be a member of Parliament. It is a deep privilege, and I am conscious of that every single day. But it is a greater privilege to recognise that when the British people give you an instruction, it is your duty to make that instruction reality. And I say to those who want to thwart this, you think that Britain, the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, and I want to say that again, the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, too many of you, I say, you think we're just a little place that doesn't matter. We have no bearing. Well, I ask the simple question. If you took the United Kingdom out of the world, what would you lose? You wouldn't lose a piece of land. You wouldn't lose a thing stuck on the end of Europe. This is the country that gave the world the concept of parliamentary democracy and freedom. This is the country that gave the world the right to own property as an inalienable right that no kings, no princes, and no despots could ever take away from you. The rule of law, the free market that governs the whole of the world and how we trade, including the concept of the WTO, and we like the WTO, don't we? And if you're not persuaded by that, just about every sport that you play was probably designed on playing fields inside this country, even though we don't win any of them anymore. So I have a very simple message. I love this country dearly. I love it with all my heart. I love people whether they're Remainers or Leavers, I don't care. But I know one thing. This country's greatness lies ahead of it. And we have an opportunity and a duty to deliver it. I pledge to you tonight, I will not sleep. I will not rest. I will not wake to find a Britain that is otherwise than independent and free once again. Thank you.
It's pretty clear. I'll say it again. I talked about courage, ladies and gentlemen, and that is the absolute definition of courage. Thank you, Ian. Now, there is an important thing that we've still all got to do, because actually we need to give that courage and that confidence to MPs over there. And so we need to implore you to write to your MPs, to get your friends to write to them, anybody you know, anywhere. Just tell them again, WTO, a WTO Brexit is a good Brexit. We want to leave. So let's just say it again so that everybody can, so that they can hear us over there. What do we want to go? Let's go WTO. Let's go WTO. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, again, from the world of business. He's a great character, a true entrepreneur. He's a massive supporter of Brexit. And believe it or not, he trained as a barrister. And the first thing he did when he finished his exams, he looked at his books on law and he went and bought a pub. And he's grown a pub business from one pub in 1979 to almost 1,000 pubs, I think just over 900 as we speak. It's a stock market listed company, and it's without question the most interesting chairman's statement that you'll ever read. It's just full of enthusiasm about the opportunities from WTO. He's a great speaker. Before we welcome Tim Martin to the stage, let's just see him in action on the video.
Wetherspoon, the chain of over 900 UK pubs, printed 200,000 beer mats criticising the EU and the IMF. And now the pub group's founder, Tim Martin, is taking the debate to his drinkers personally, visiting 100 of his pubs across the country, talking to customers and encouraging them to vote out.
I think it's probably overplayed. Economists got it completely wrong about the outcome of the referendum.
For example, that food prices will rise, that's come from big business, and it's not true.
So we believe the country would be better off with no deal because it's a protectionist system. So why not say it?
Please welcome to the stage, Tim Martin.
Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Deeply appreciate it. Fantastic speakers before me. I'm going to try and not repeat everything that's been said, but the main point I think to say is don't believe Project Fear. That's how pathetic to rely so much on actually frightening people to try and win your case, especially when you've already lost the referendum, which also tried to rely on Project Fear. As Ian said, the planes won't fly. We've got the runways, we've got the planes, and we've got the money. They don't need to land in Spain. We like the Spanish, but we're quite happy if they go to Florida. We might even... There's plenty of places to go, but of course we now find the planes will fly after all, because of course if they don't fly, who will be worse off? It'll be the tourist resorts that we like to go to, and the poor people who are also victims of the Brussels regime in Europe. We heard the banks were all going to leave. The number of times that those of us who supported Brexit had to argue till we were blue in the face before the referendum that the banks wouldn't leave. And there's now more people employed in the City of London today than there were before the referendum. So we heard the Channel ports will seize up, but the guy that's running the Calais end of the thing says you can't get it much more incontrovertible than this. He said, there will be no delays. Maybe he said it in French and no one in Parliament understood. But our guy in Dover has said something very, very similar. And we did a little experiment, which I've told some of you here about before, but I'll just quickly tell you. We've got nothing against the French, we've got nothing against French companies. We feel sorry for them in a way, but we decided sacrilegiously to say we're going to swap from French brandy and French champagne to sparkling wine from England, which sells very, very well. And this will be sacrilegious. We swap brandy for the rough old Australians. Black bottle brandy is actually very good. 10 pence less a shot. Let me get a plug in for my business. And those categories of drink have increased. So the idea that Channel ports will seize up is just a fiction. And if they do, you can buy things from the 93% of the world that isn't in the EU, from the rest of the world. Just very briefly, many of us here were against the euro. It's a crazy, crazy idea foisted on the unfortunate eurozone countries. Every other currency in the world is backed by a government to raise taxes, distribute the money. They don't have it. But everyone told us, if you can remember 15 years ago, and some of you will, it's probably 17, 18 years ago, if we don't join the euro, we're in trouble. And the main evidence for that was from the car companies, that they all fuck off to the continent. Because they'd be exposed to currency risk. Well, it hasn't happened. Our car companies have done very well. And in spite of what people said, our economy has grown much faster than the Eurozone. So it's a crazy Project Fear back then. But remember, I'm just going to repeat these points that I said them before. No deal means we save 39 billion. Point one. It also means that we regain control of fishing on day one, on the 29th of... We can eliminate tariffs on lots of things we don't even produce in this country. Bananas, oranges, Aussie wine, and many other things, children's clothes. they're not just on a few items, it's on 12,000 items. The taxes, the tariffs are collected in this country and they're sent to the EU. It's not free trade, you know. It doesn't give a good vibe to, if you're encouraging other companies to come and invest in the UK, which is what we want, that there's this complex tariff system. Much better, get rid. And you don't need anyone's permission. A lot of people are confused by what's being said. You don't need anyone's permission to do any of these things. The people in the House across the road can vote for that, and they can make it happen on the 29th of March if they decide to do it. I've just been doing a little tour around the country, and there's a few things that wind up the British people. And one is that they didn't understand the flipping vote. You know? If you want to really, really annoy people, try going into a pub in Sunderland and saying, "Is it true? Is it true you didn't understand?" But as has been said here, the leaflet that popped through every household in the country said, you decide, it's a constitutional issue that the Parliament has delegated to the people, and the government will implement your decision. So that's all they have to do. They have to implement the decision that was taken. So I think the CBI that wanted to join that's the Employers Federation, the CBI, they wanted to join the disastrous exchange rate mechanism, the predecessor of the euro. They were adamant we should join the euro, and they were adamant that we should vote to remain in the EU. But it's terrible. They use a lot of false statistics, such as the one that food prices will automatically rise. Some clever dick thinks the public is thick and that you can eliminate tariffs and food prices go up. They've got the temerity to keep saying this same thing. But it's terribly bad for business and bad for the country that the CBI and other organisations are behaving in this way, because it means we end up criticising, people like me are criticising business organisations, which isn't a positive for the country in the long run. So it's terrible. But I won't hack on. Very many thanks for leaving. Don't worry about leaving on WTO rules. We can get a lot of benefits immediately from doing it. There's a great song by a group. I can't remember their name now, but I was going to sing it, but I've chickened out. It's All Saints, that's right, and it's bring it on, bring it on now. Let's leave on WTO rules. Thank you very much indeed.
Isn't he great? We'll reserve judgment whether he's a better publican or singer, but he's fantastic. Our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, again, has demonstrated incredible courage in the face of abuse, vilification, constantly over the last 25 years. He, of course, needs little introduction. He was one of the original Brexiteers. And there is no question, without any hesitation at all, few people have changed the course of British politics in the way that our next speaker has. He is without question one of the most influential public figures in this country since the Second World War. He's put up with just unbelievable aggression, attacks on him and his family. And the nation needs to be incredibly grateful for what he's helped to achieve with this Leave vote. And that courage was, of course, epitomised when he had a slight argument in an aeroplane about 8 years ago, when he crashed. It's pretty nasty. It would have killed some people, but not our Nigel. Oh no. He dragged himself out, wiped away the blood from his forehead, dusted himself down, looked around the field, put his hand in his pocket, pulled out a fag and promptly lit it. Before we welcome him to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, let's just look at a clip of Nigel in action.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air.
For goodness sake, get rid of not just the worst Prime Minister I've ever seen, but perhaps the most dishonest one as well. I'm going to try and get the people to let their members of Parliament know they will not accept being betrayed.
And I tell you what, if I have to do this again, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy.
We had a referendum. We voted for something. Our politicians should deliver this.
We have made our minds up in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country.
I trust the voice of the people more than the politicians.
Please welcome to the stage Nigel Farage.
Fantastic. Are you having a good evening? What a great lineup of speakers. Just a couple of disappointments for me. The first is that Rocco Forte got the protesters. They were meant for me, and I'm very, very disappointed. The second is that Tim Martin is doing a pub crawl of 100 pubs around the country, and he hasn't even invited me. I've been jetting around this week back and forth between London and Strasbourg, as you may have heard. So I've spent a couple of days with Monsieur Barnier and Mr. Juncker, who could become your best customer, Tim, I've got to tell you. And of course I've crossed swords with Guy Verhofstadt and many others. But I got to thinking, I've left Strasbourg and I've come back to Westminster. But who really, in this Brexit process, are the enemies? Is it the unelected bureaucrats? Is it the MEPs in Brussels? Is it those that are trying to build a United States of Europe with their own army and an expansive foreign policy? No. Actually, folks, we tonight here in Westminster are in the heart of enemy territory. You see, it couldn't really be clearer, could it? We were given a referendum on whether to remain or leave the European Union. We had the whole establishment. We had George Osborne as Chancellor telling us that 500,000 jobs would be lost. Everybody would, I'll use the word leave London if that's all right with you. And they told us it'd be so bad that when the President of America came, we were going to be at the back of the queue. They virtually told us that plagues of black locusts would descend upon our land, and 17.4 million brave souls stood up, defied them, and voted to take back control of our country. We then faced a general election in which both of the major parties, who took over 80% of the vote, promised us that that referendum result would be implemented. We then moved on to Article 50 being put before the House of Commons and 498 members of Parliament voting for it. And what it said couldn't be clearer. It said from the date we trigger Article 50, we have up to 2 years to negotiate a withdrawal agreement, or we leave 2 years after we triggered Article 50. It couldn't be clearer. It is written into UK law, and that is exactly what should happen. But I'm afraid the truth of it is that our political class, much of our establishment and many of the giant multinational businesses never respected that vote from day one. They have done all they can to frustrate it, all they can to delay it. And we get a never-ending series of negative messages. The whole thing is couched continually in economic terms, isn't it? We'll be worse off. We'll be poorer. It'll be a disaster. The very same people who told us we had to join the exchange rate mechanism. Remember that one? It led to, in 1992, a year of record business bankruptcies and house repossessions. But undeterred, the same people told us if we didn't join the euro, the City of London would close down, manufacturing would disappear, it would be a disaster. Thank God we didn't listen to them. Thank God we didn't listen to them. And having been proved wrong again and again, now they tell us that leaving the European Union would be a disaster. Well, can we please go back to first principles? Can we please start to change the debate? The referendum wasn't about whether someone thinks we might be worse off or someone thinks we might be better off. Economic projections are difficult at the best of times. The referendum was about something else. The referendum was about a word that now seems to have evaporated in our whole debate on Brexit. This word that actually is the ultimate prize. This word that our forebears fought and gave so much more for in 2 world wars and more. This word that says we can be a free, independent, democratic, proud, self-governing state that makes its own laws, that controls its own borders, that chooses its friends around the world. And I want us to bring this word, this proud word, back into this whole debate. The word is, and what we voted for was, the independence of this country. That is what we voted for. Independence. And yet, despite the fact we have this piece of law that says we will leave on WTO terms, and sure, no deal, no problem, the difficulty is our political class do not believe in Britain. I want to ask you, do you believe in Britain? Well, I'm pleased to hear it, because we have finished up, I'm afraid, with a failed negotiation, with a withdrawal agreement that in the end looked more like a surrender document of a country that had been beaten at war and quite rightly was voted down for the House of Commons the other evening. But now, in a desperate attempt, the Prime Minister wants to try and get her Brexit in name only through, and she's now engaged on a cross-party debate, attempting to achieve consensus with a group of parties who are all Remainers. The only person that didn't turn up, of course, was Jeremy Corbyn, which is odd. Well, he's perfectly happy to meet Hamas, isn't he? Perfectly happy to meet Hezbollah, happy to take tea with the IRA, but he wouldn't go and meet Mrs May, which I find a little bit strange. They told us when we voted that we were voting for uncertainty. Well, let me tell you what would have happened if we'd voted to remain. Since that date, we have seen the confirmation. Despite 50 years of lies from the British establishment, 50 years of the British establishment telling us that the common market, that the European Union is just about trade, cooperation, and will not affect our sovereignty. I remember very well doing a debate against Nick Clegg. Oh, I'm sorry, Sir Nick Clegg, that's important, that bit. But I remember doing a debate and saying to him one of the reasons I did not want to be in the European Union is because they would build a European army, and I believe that would threaten NATO and our own military abilities. I was told that I was some sort of hysterical crank, lying to the public. Now we have Mr Juncker telling us by 2025 there will be a European army, navy and air force. On the 9th of May this year, Mrs Merkel, the real boss, of course, of Europe, and Monsieur Macron, whose star may have fallen somewhat, but they will be giving a joint press conference announcing further deep, sweeping, and they use the word reforms. What they mean are a further centralisation of power. This European project is about building a unitary state. It is about getting rid of the nation states as effective operating entities. Far from Remain having given us certainty, we would have plunged further into, frankly, regional irrelevance. So let's be clear, Brussels isn't working. And right across Europe, there are people now rising up on the right, the centre and the left saying they wish to govern our own countries. And just as in the past in history, we have often been the nation that has given the example to the rest of Europe, I believe that by delivering Brexit, we will also get rid of this European Union and replace it with a Europe of sovereign nation states working together as friends and trading. Now, I have been, over the course of the last year, I have been perhaps publicly the most pessimistic of all the Brexiteers. And at a previous Leave Means Leave rally, I said things that many in the audience didn't want to hear. My New Year's resolution was that I was going to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And I can tell you, it's the only New Year's resolution I've managed to keep so far in my adult life. The rest all go by the wayside fairly quickly. So we do hope for the best, and we wish those fighting this great battle in Parliament well. But we fear not just the lack of resolve of so many in the Cabinet, the Amber Rudds. It's easier than theatre, this, isn't it? The Philip Hammonds. But worst of all, it would appear that previous parliamentary precedent has now been thrown out of the window by a man who puts rude car stickers on saying something about Brexit. That weasel Bercow will do whatever he can to help the law of the land be overturned. I hope they win this great parliamentary battle, but folks, it would be negligent of us in this great campaign, this great cause to take back the independence of our nation, not to recognise that now it is quite possible that we will see an extension of Article 50. And when I've talked in the past about being worried that they may force us into a second referendum, I don't want it any more than you do. But I'm saying to you, we have to face reality in the face. Don't think the other side aren't organised. Don't think the other side aren't prepared. Don't think the other side haven't raised the money, haven't got the teams in place. They have. The Remain campaign are well organised. And one of the failures on our side is, having won this historic victory, we kind of all went back to our day jobs. And I guess it was reasonable to think, wasn't it, with 500 MPs voting for Article 50, that we'd won, that was the end of it. Folks, I don't believe that it is the end of it. And what I am doing here together with Leave Means Leave is building an organisation, building a structure on the ground, rebuilding the People's Army that helped us win that referendum in 2016. They believe. All I can tell you is this: if they extend Article 50 and we're forced to fight the next set of European elections, I will be fighting them. Make no doubt about that. And if worse comes to worst, and they force us into fighting a second referendum, and let's hope and pray that it doesn't happen. It doesn't need to happen. We've had the people's vote already, but let us prepare, let us organise, and I urge all of you to help us in this great campaign. In fact, the better organised they believe we are, the less likely they are to call that second referendum. I hope it's not needed, but I'm pessimistic, and I believe that it may. And I'll tell you, as I said in the video, if I have to fight again against this lot, then believe me, next time, as far as I'm concerned, it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. Thank you.
What is clear, ladies and gentlemen, what is clear is that Nigel hasn't gone anywhere, and potentially he's just warming up. We haven't finished, ladies and gentlemen, because we continue the theme of courage, and our final speaker this evening is a very courageous lady, and she herself has faced hideous abuse and vilification from other members of Parliament. She was born and bred in Liverpool and educated in Liverpool, and I'm incredibly grateful that, like me, she supports the Reds. Very important, that. She was a TV presenter before becoming the first and only ever Conservative MP on Merseyside. That's quite an achievement. She's had a number of parliamentary and ministerial positions before she became the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in 2018. And when I talk about the abuse that she faced, can you imagine the Shadow Chancellor, the current Shadow Chancellor, sitting in a meeting, asking members of that meeting to lynch our next speaker? Utterly disgraceful. That's what happened. She's an absolute star, and she resigned from Cabinet, as did Ian, on a matter of deep principle. She knew that the Brexit deal was the worst deal in history. And I'm afraid, unlike other Cabinet members who say they're Brexiteers, she knows what Brexit really means. And she stood up for her principles, and she resigned. Before we welcome
Esther to the stage, let's just look at her in action.
Esther McVey goes, and maybe no surprise because she was thought to be one of those who was most argumentative, most unhappy.
Why, oh why, are we handing over £39 billion and what for? Can the Prime Minister assure the House today that the UK will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March 2019, come what may? This is about trust. Not only in politicians, but trust in what the people had voted for. They voted out, and we must always remember that. People who know me know that I'm forthright, I am feisty, I am straight talking.
Please welcome to the stage
Esther McVey, MP.
Wow, it is amazing to be here this evening. When I was invited, they said, come along because you will be amongst friends. You will be amongst fellow people who voted Brexit, and I'm here tonight. Now, we all will give our message in a different way. We all talk a different language. We've all lived a different experience. But that message is the same one. That we all believe that there is a better future ahead of us. We all voted Brexit, and we all want to get out the EU. And when I said I'd come to tonight, I didn't really know how important tonight was going to be. I didn't really know how important today was going to be, because really, a couple of years ago, you would have thought you'd be celebrating tonight. We're on our way out. It would all be fine. We're on our way out. But actually, the truth is, that isn't the case. The Brexit roller coaster isn't over. And I'd say to everybody in this room tonight, do you know what? Buckle up. Sit tight. Because that roller coaster ride is about to get harder, tougher, and we've got hell of a journey in front of us, starting tonight. And it has been a roller coaster of a ride, hasn't it? The campaign wasn't easy. Project Fear wasn't easy, but we fought it and won. And then we got the result, an unexpected result, but we got it. So we thought all was going to be fine, but actually it was winning, and that's where the Remainers started to infiltrate. That's where Chequers was designed, where resignations happened. When the withdrawal agreement came forward and resignations happened, we had votes of no confidence in the PM. And then this week we saw the biggest ever rejection of that withdrawal agreement, and then a vote of confidence in the government. And what we're going to see now is not a pivot to safety to deliver Brexit. We're going to see a pivot away and possibly a complete overtaking, reversal, and removing to Remain. But we can't let that happen. We won't let that happen. I felt the energy in this room, and we're going to take it out to our fellow Brexiteers and make sure that does not happen. And we won that vote fair and square. We got told we were coming out, we were told about the red lines, we were told about everything else. In our manifesto at the 27 general election, we got told out of the customs union, out of the single market. But I'm standing here today thinking it's not going to be as plain sailing as that. And do you know what I'm going to say today? Maybe we sat back. Maybe there's a little bit of blame that should be on our shoulders. We won. We expected it to happen. We believe in democracy. We thought we could trust our MPs. We thought it was going to happen. We told them what they wanted. We are public servants. We work for you. It should have been plain sailing. But you know what? Because of our trust in the people we elected, we thought it would go through. But that's not transpired to be the case, because 75% of the MPs in the House either voted Remain or they campaigned for Remain. We thought they would have listened to us, changed their views, and implemented what we'd asked them to do. But that seems it isn't the case. And you know how it started? It's quite interesting how it started. It was simple. It was in or out. We voted out. And then the word Brexit came along, and there were subtle changes in language. Brexit allowed the rewriting of history. Brexit moved, was it soft? Was it hard? Was it red, white and blue? Was it a pick and mix Brexit? And all of a sudden people have forgotten. They're confused about what was on that ballot paper. But I know there was no confusion. It was in or out, and we've got to remind people of that. Now, we've had the hokey-cokey Brexit, the half-in, half-out, with the checkers and withdrawal. And we've now got the topsy-turvy world of Brexit, where instead of leave meaning leave, leave now means remain. Exactly. And we've got to change that back around again. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey to get here today, because it probably did start at Chequers. And I went to Chequers last summer, and interestingly, all those hundreds of pages of legal text that we had to go through and decipher, was that right or wrong? When do you think we got it? Yeah, a couple of days before. So we went there, like you'd have an away day. We thought it'd be about discussing. We thought we'd be about talking about it. They'd probably have, suggestions put either way, people saying what they thought about it. What we did not know, as we sat and had dinner, yes, we did, our mobile phones were taken. We didn't realise there was a press release going out. Didn't realise it was meant to be unanimous consent for what had gone on, because there wasn't. Many people spoke up and said this wasn't what we believed in. And as you know, 2 people resigned straight away. But I listened to the words. I hope people were listening to me. And they said, we will listen now. It doesn't seem right. In fact, it wasn't us who rejected it. It was the EU. So I carried on, going forward, putting my suggestions through, being told Brexit meant Brexit, being told there were 4 red lines, being told we'd deliver the result for the people. And then came the withdrawal agreement. 585 pages of a document, a political declaration, and the Attorney General's legal advice. Do you know when we were given that to read? Yeah, the night before. Do you want to try reading 585 pages of legal text? And then that morning, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m, when the meeting was, in the reading room so things couldn't be taken out. Well, I asked for lawyers. I asked for a constitutional expert, because I wanted to go through what was going on. We knew where the key issues were. We knew where we needed to probe. Did that make sense? I wasn't given those people. But I knew enough people to call up and maybe ask what it could mean. I also wanted to know, what about our free trade agreements, what we wanted? We'd heard about the Common Rule Book, we'd heard about the Customs Union, and I wanted to know, could we have those free trade agreements? What would it mean? And if we couldn't have them in their entirety, because we've been curtailed from having that, what could it mean? Was it 60%? Was it 70%? Could we have one with America? Could we have one with Australia? Could we have one with Canada? Could you draw me a chart of what this really means? I asked for that for weeks upon weeks, never got it. I went to see the Prime Minister privately. I said, I have a serious concern with what's going on. You can't say too much at Cabinet nowadays. It finds itself in the paper the next morning. It's less of a Cabinet now, more of a sieve. So I said, can I see you in private? I said, this withdrawal deal will not wash. I said, I've got a 9-point plan here of how I think it'll pan out. In fact, I think everybody will unite against this withdrawal agreement. I think it might be quite chaotic afterwards. What will we do then? Where will we go then? I said, my advice is to do another Salzburg speech. Say this isn't good enough, we've tried. Go back to the EU. Say for the 39 billion we want a free trade agreement, not just to talk about one. And we want to get rid of the Northern Ireland backstop. Their advisors and everybody around us said, we will get the vote. It will pass. It is a good deal. It takes a special kind of genius to get that many people to oppose your deal. And they thought I was the mad one telling them the vote wouldn't get through in the House. So when I went to Cabinet the next day, reassured by their words that they were going to win the vote. And I wasn't. Having heard the Attorney General say this was an ugly sister of a deal, I said, if you think that, if Cabinet Ministers think that, what do you think the public's going to think of that? I said, I can't put my name to this document because this document will last far longer than my term in Cabinet. Little did I know it was going the next day. Last far longer than me in Parliament. It'll last far longer than me. This is about the UK's future. I said, I can't put my name next to that. So I said, because, to be fair, there were dissenting voices around the Cabinet table, and I said, can we have a vote of the Cabinet? And the reason I wanted to do that is I wanted people to focus on what we were doing. We'd been there for 5 hours. Everybody had pretty much spoken for 20 minutes apiece. We'd gone round the table. People were saying, oh, it's not good enough, I don't like it, or it's fine, it'll go through. And I said, let's take a vote. This is so important. We believe in transparency. We believe in democracy. On the biggest thing ever in our lifetime, in our political lifetime, let's take a vote in the Cabinet. It wasn't unheard of. Other Prime Ministers have done it, but it is down to the Prime Minister. And I was shouted down and told, no, we're not going to do it. I will use an expression from Liverpool. Everybody hid behind the pencil rather than having to vote, so they couldn't be seen. I left Cabinet the next morning. I went home that night. I wrote my resignation letter. And I think the two most important words were trust and confidence. Trust that we'd given you for you to vote and give us an answer. Trust from you to us that we were going to deliver them that. And confidence. You have confidence in the United Kingdom and its capabilities. We had to have confidence in the United Kingdom. And then there was a little bit of, not Project Fear, but Project Smear against me. I was the person who flew into a rage. I had a meltdown. I was crying, whatever it was. It's what they try and do when they're trying to say, really, emotional lady who can't cope with the heat. And that is rubbish. Thank you very much indeed. I have steel that runs through me. And I am a public servant, like you've seen Kate, like you've seen Ian here, spectacular public servants, and we will do what you ask us to do when we've got the confidence to do it. And now what we're talking about in the House is slightly bizarre to me, because on the 29th of March, we are leaving the EU. And the default position, which everybody has signed off on in the House, is to leave without a deal. That is what we put in place. That is what we have agreed to. So it is only right we do the preparations for no deal. It is only right that we make sure if that's what we've put in law, we can cope and we can deal with that. Civil servants, to be fair, have been working those plans. That preparation is in place. Money has been put aside for that. So first of all, we have told the Prime Minister, go back to the EU and get a better deal. No backstop on the 39 billion for a future trade agreement. And at the same time running parallel, because we must do that in order to get a better deal anyway, is to continue with our no-deal preparations, because that is what is happening. We cannot put our head in the sand. So Project Fear has now started on what all of the MPs signed off ages ago, triggered Article 50 ages ago. Nigel said before about the unemployment, as Minister and then Secretary of State for Employment, like Ian, who started the change in the employment system, who brought in the new system back in 2010. Do you know in this country from 2010, 1,000 more jobs each and every day has been created until 2018. And it is still continuing. More jobs have been created in the UK since 2010 than France, Spain, Ireland, Austria, Netherlands, Sweden, and Norway combined. We have taken youth unemployment down by 50% in the UK, but across Europe it is sky high. We're looking at our youth's future. We want them to have a better future. A better future is outside the EU. They told us investment would stop coming into the UK. It hasn't, it's at record levels. They said our tech industry would be very vulnerable. It's not the case. Google's come here, SoftBank's come here, Amazon's come here. Do you know what now? In London, we've got more coders than in San Francisco and New York. This is the place to be. And technology is the future. Technology is the big disruptor of this modern age. That is what is changing jobs. That is what is changing enterprise. That is what is changing the shape of the world. That is what we've got to deal with. It's got to work for us. It's got to work for the country. It's got to work for where we're going. Technology will also give us our solutions. The solutions for transporting goods. The solutions for customs arrangements. It will give us our future. You can now set up a business in your bedroom and be anywhere in the world. So to look backwards in a rear-view mirror about what is happening with 28 countries in the EU, you're looking at the wrong problem and the wrong solution. The solution is to be an agile country. It is about being a nimble country. It is about making technology work for you, and it is about going out there in the world, being able to be, as I say, nimble, making your decisions quickly, and technology is what is going to unleash that when we are out of the EU. Now, I am pleased to be here among so many people who made sure that Brexit happened. And I am pleased also to be an MP with fellow MPs here. And there's not many of us who believe in the cause, but we're fighting hard. We're fighting hard for you, and we will not rest as a minority in Parliament until you get what you voted for.
Is it great? You heard it. You heard it very powerfully, very strongly, that courage, that principle, to resign so quickly from cabinet. You know, many MPs, they like rising the ladder, they like all the trappings that come with it. But to Esther, principle and a belief in democracy and our country was more than anything, and that is fantastic. We've had a lot of fun tonight, ladies and gentlemen, but all great things must come to an end. People, we've got homes to get to. But before we do that, there's just two things, please. Firstly, what I said earlier, all of us can still help. We need to write to our MPs. We need to tell them we believe in Brexit. We believe in Britain. We know that a WTO Brexit is the way to go. The second thing I want is that everybody to stand on their feet, and we're going to make a final huge piece of noise and remind people over there that there's two things we want. One is Brexit, and the other is now. So let's have you on your feet, lift up your placards, and let's say it together. What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a very safe trip home.